talking about priorities to propel Mexico's supply chain forward. And I've said it a few times during the event, and I'm right at the beginning. I mean, Mexico is a competitive place to do business for automotive, for many, many reasons, both proximity, cost effectiveness, obviously the integration of supply chain and logistics. But there are things that are slowing down or disrupting that competitiveness. And we have to face those head on. Some of them are absolutely external, things that are hard for us to influence. USMCA perhaps at the top of the list, although as we'll talk about, maybe at least as an industry, we can ensure to have a voice, a common voice, and try to make priorities heard. And so we'll be talking about some of that in the next discussion. There are other things we absolutely can do as an industry to improve our processes, and we've already talked about quite a few of them. Whether it's getting your data strategy right, connecting different systems, improving visibility, working closely together there. So in the next session, we want to cap this off. We want to sort of reflect on, for sure, some of what we've heard, but look ahead to these key priorities. And like I mentioned before, we're going to look at that, I think, from two perspectives. One is, again, I would say from the public realm. What should the Mexican government, what should the Mexican industry kind of as a whole prioritize? Whether it's infrastructure investment, whether it's trade policy, et cetera. What are the factors that we need to keep in mind? But very importantly, what can we together in this room, in this industry do? And we have a panel composition that will reflect that. And I hope, again, that this can be interactive and we can have your questions and comments along the way as well. So I'm going to introduce them to you. Very pleased to, I've lost a little count. Is it the third time, Lizetta? So you've been with us the last couple of events, and we've been very pleased for that. But very, very pleased to welcome Lizetta Gracida back. She's Senior Director of External Affairs and Trade Compliance at Toyota Mexico. And it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
Extremely knowledgeable in the public realm there of the negotiations, and will give us some very good insights on the say public affairs side and the trade compliance, which across the event we've talked about how complex that has become. So really looking forward to your insights, Lizetta. Some of you will have met him earlier in our student panel and prior to other events. Gerardo de la Torre, who's the Regional Senior Director of Supply Chain Management for Nissan Group of Americas. Gerardo. So good to have you with us. Gerardo is responsible for a huge, big range of functions in the region here, including some very important projects in Mexico, which we'll be talking about in this panel as well. And also bringing the perspective of freight forwarding, but with a career that has been very also involved and strongly integrated with Tier 1 suppliers. I'm very pleased that Ian Slavin can be with us. He's Vice President, Global Sales Vertical Lead for Automotive at Kuehne + Nagel. Ian, good to have you here. Thank you. Thanks so much. So please join. As mentioned, I'll kick us off, and at a point I'll also ask the audience for some questions as well. But let's start. As I mentioned, I wanted to sort of try to think about this both from the sort of public side in terms of government policy and industry policy, as well as then what we can do. Let's start a little bit on what we think the priority should be from a policy point of view, to maintain a competitive edge for Mexico and advantages in supply chain and logistics. So I'm going to kick that off with you, Lizetta. I know it's a big question, and we could probably do a whole conference just on that, but I know how succinct you are, so let's
No problem. First, thank you very much
Pleasure.
for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. And I would say that more than policy itself, what the industry needs right now is certainty.
Yeah.
That is the magic word. We need clear rules, no sudden changes that disrupt our industry. For example, under the current tariff context, the industry is facing a great deal of uncertainty, whether tariffs will increase, whether new tariffs will be imposed, or how long these tariffs will stay or remain in place. On the other hand, there is also uncertainty in terms of the USMCA on how the review or the renegotiation will unfold, and also how long this review will take to the parties to achieve an agreement. And that is just from the trade perspective. But if we go into Mexico and within the Mexican issues, the auto sector is also exposed to a series of sudden changes that are impacting the business environment and affecting the auto companies. And those changes go from regulatory matters to constitutional reforms. And as an example, we have, during this half a year, we have seen the constitutional reform to the Amparo Law, to the Customs Law, to the tax code, the implementation of the electronic value manifest that I'm sure
many
you
times,
have talked about this before, and also the potential increase of the most favored nation tariffs that will impact
non-FTA countries.
yes, for those countries with which Mexico has no free trade agreements. So this environment, of course, is creating a lot of uncertainty. And here, what the OEMs, the industry, would request to the government to prioritize is to provide regulatory predictability, and meaning that we have workable rules and realistic timelines, so that the industry and the OEMs can really operate under true legal certainty.
Yeah, I think it says it very well, and we spoke about that a bit before. Obviously, we hope to get if we think of USMCA, we hope to get a good deal, but at the same time, certainty is better than where we are right now.
Absolutely,
for sure.
yeah.
Gerardo, just kicking off, from your point of view, similar points, other things from a policy point of view that you would prioritize?
Well, thank you for the invitation, Christopher. And on top of what is been shared, I think it's a very important moment that Mexico needs to really consider how we want to play in the global arena and how we want to reposition Mexico in the competitive way that we have historically been, right? I fully agree that this is a very important moment that for all the reviews that are happening already for the USMCA, Mexico needs to take the correct approach. Mexico needs to take the right level of topics on the table, because this can mean a very unprecedented bad news for us if it is not properly negotiated and clearly defend on pro of the competitiveness of our automotive supply entire chains, right?
Yeah.
So I think that point is absolutely important. On top of this, there are multiple, I believe, emerging problems that comes with these big disruptions. As example, within the tariffs, I strongly believe that tariffs need to come to a very clear final path, because we've been experiencing A, B, and C, and it's impossible to get correct planning, correct prediction, correct assessment of our competitiveness from profitable final line point of view if the rules are absolutely changing. There is a lot to be done in recovering our rule of law, and not only for automotive industry, but the entire society. I believe there is a must recover for companies to understand that investing in Mexico is guaranteed. This has a lot of benefits for profitability, of course, but also for the rule of law that's necessary to restore. So I highly think that should be one of the most important priorities for authorities at whatever local, state, or federal level to really reestablish, right? And of course, after that, I think from policy point of view, we should really put the automotive sector once again as a one integrated cluster in such a way that we all can work in all of those areas, that we can find potential synergies. We can work together to bring recommendations to the policies in order to make us more competitive together. There are other countries that are already being organized as an automotive industry, plus other sectors to develop whatever digital solution, digital, more efficient customs for all the industry, more efficient data management of TRM, blah, blah, blah. And I believe in Mexico we still have, unfortunately, a fragmented type of solutions by company A, company B, company C, but we all rely on suppliers. We all rely on suppliers of our suppliers. And I think we can even eliminate the burden for our suppliers to be responding to requirement A by company A, or B to company B, or C to company C. So we can do it more efficient for industry base And of course, on top of this, making sure that Mexico remains competitive in all the regulatory requirements in the auto industry is absolutely key. So there are more that I think, on top of what has already been shared by Lisette, that those are the more remarkable
Yeah,
ones,
absolutely, and we're going to drill down into some of those in a bit. But Ian, from your point of view, I saw you nodding, so I doubt you disagree too much with what was said. But things you'd add to that from your point of view?
Well, I agree, as you say, with everything that's already been said. In kind of at the risk of being redundant, I'll just draw on a couple of things that were already said. So, trying to achieve an environment where the companies doing business in your country and/or the region, when we kind of zoom out and look at MCA as a whole, do the participants in that region understand that the regulations and/or environment is fixed for a period of time, because planning is absolutely paramount. If you don't have the ability to plan, you're not going to be able to meaningfully scale and deliver a product that the customer base wants. If you're unable to do that in a really strong way, then you're not going to be able to return kind of the, to use the same word twice, the return to the shareholders that they're looking for, which won't allow you to prosper in the way that you're hoping to, the way that the shareholders and the institutional investors are hoping you to do so, and then which then goes back to, it's a full circle, right? It then goes back to the countries that you do business in, and if you're unable to realize the market potential and continue to push the product forward, you're not going to reinvest or be able to reinvest in the same way that you would have otherwise in the countries where you're, building the vehicles, the parts, whatever have you, the road transport, the warehousing, the customs. So it has, it comes full circle. To hit on Lizette's point, that's paramount. And then where we do have regulatory changes, I think the governments involved, again, while we are talking about Mexico today, I think we would be remiss if we didn't include the US and Canada in this. They have to understand what are the implications of the regulations. And are we, while they want to move fast, are we being, paced in the rollout in a way that allows the full kind of life cycle, or I guess maturity cycle, of businesses to participate in this regulation? I'm sure we'll talk about Cartaporte at some point, but the way that was rolled out, kind of the grace periods that were given at different points, the way that it was changed over time, quickly, then slowly, then quickly, it didn't allow for all businesses to be able to comply, in a way that they felt comfortable with. And it also, it was a bit regressive in a way, because small, medium-sized businesses had a different financial burden in order to comply with it. So, I think that's really important, that they understand, like, yes, there are problems to be addressed through regulatory policy, but are we taking it forward into the country in a slow enough way to allow people to comply, but also, do we understand, the potential hurdles or obstacles that some of these companies will have in complying, because maybe we need to meet them halfway. And then that way you have an environment that achieves, what the government through the regulatory policy had wanted, but you also have a market that thrives along with the policy.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think these are very important points as an industry that we can all align on in many ways, competitors and stuff alike, that we can accept that these requirements have come in, but understand the implications. As you've made very well the point, the lack of certainty is a killer for industry right now. Even when we spoke earlier with Evelyn from Stellantis, and what's a quick win in localization? Well, there's no such thing really. The quickest win is maybe 6 months, a year, if you're shifting something there. So, and what decisions can you make if you don't know the policy landscape ahead of you? So that sets a little bit the scene. I want to drill down into some of those further, but before we do, the kind of other side of the equation, what from an automotive manufacturer point of view to start with, in the supply chain, Gerardo, I know you're working on lots of optimizations right now. What would you kind of put as a top priority as you look ahead to 2026 with your teams, what are some of the key aspects that you're working on to, again, keep Mexico supply chain here as competitive as possible?
Well, it has been globally announced that we are in a very important global strategy to right-size our capacities. I'm responsible for the Americas and already finished vehicle operations in our factories in Argentina. Everyone knows that we are to transfer our capacities from Cuernavaca to Aguascalientes. This is part of a very important strategy about right-sizing our capacity, but increasing our manufacturing capacity plant utilization ratios. Of course, necessary to respond to all of this external uncertainty, as Lisette have expressed. So one of our main priorities now is reset all our supply chains for this manufacturing capacity footprint change. And of course, within this, enable all the synergies and all the collaboration that we can still identify. I really want to send a very big appreciation to all our suppliers, to all our logistics partners, to all our colleagues, because I strongly believe that with all this global direction and a perfect execution on time, which has been very challenging because all of these external problems on roads that are blocked or airports that are closed or ports that are saturated, blah, 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 and we need to finish on time and deliver on time. But of course, this priority is going to reset our capabilities to keep delivering to all our markets. We will advance in exporting back to many Latin American countries. And of course, with this priority, we want to again position ourselves more cost and profitable competitiveness, right? For this, I really appreciate within our teams, everyone that is working in all the new management of design controls for our factories that we will bring to Aguascalientes, the new packaging design, the new engineers that are in setting all the new digital solutions that we are developing, testing and validating right now in order to have a very strong, smooth, and successful launch on the production as we have just before we end this fiscal year. So. On top of that, of course, there is a lot of big priorities. We just launched new vehicles here. We are launching new vehicles in Brazil. We are, of course, in the USA bringing a lot of increase on capacity, local utilization to comply within the tariffs benefit that have been there. And all of this brings to Mexico, again, the opportunity to continue to use Mexico as a very important export hub to most of our markets. And then not only for Nissan, but to all the suppliers and through all our partners. There is a lot of priority for compliance, supply chain compliance and mapping human rights, cybersecurity prevention, digital solutions that are ongoing to position ourselves as a supply chain resilient every time with more capabilities to deliver, but to recover our profitability as is important in our company.
It is, and I think that the key message that one can take away is difficult decisions obviously have been made for Nissan in Mexico, but the goal is to maintain or increase the production. So that means re-optimizing, redesigning the supply chain to match.
We are re-optimizing, and what is absolutely important is that the forecast is still within volume that are somehow very close to our historical volumes.
Yeah.
And of course, to keep that, we continue with all of this predictability and resilient tools that are being brought to our company since more than 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So we continue to find a way to build the future for our company and our customers.
Lisette, I mean, I know your role is external affairs and trade compliance, but I'm sure you also work with the supply chain teams and interact. When you look for Toyota Mexico, where do you think some of those key priorities lie right now?
So and this priority is not only for Toyota Mexico, but the whole region and globally. And the priority is to be a more resilient company, and with that also have a supply chain that generates this collective resilience. Because there are many external factors that impact our business, and we need to be able to be stronger to tolerate such factors while maintaining efficiencies and competitiveness.
Absolutely. Ian, from a freight forward logistics provider, although I know you also have a lot of supplier experience, but from your point of view, what do you put as the key priority of what you can control and could enable together with your customers to improve the supply chain?
So it would seem that I'm just going to drift off these two all day. So what they've
Not
said,
the worst drift.
so what they've said is correct. And so what our job as Freight Forward is to listen to the two of you and to the rest of you. Because in this environment where we see increased unpredictability, volatility, and regulatory change, or company culture change, company direction change, it's up to us to come into the meetings, the interactions, ears wide open, silence ourselves for a moment, and hear what you have to say, and then look inside of ourselves and our operations to ask, okay, we've heard what their challenges are, what their aspirations are, what their financial targets are. How do we then come to the table and supply you with some of the the basic core offerings that we've supplied for decades and decades and decades, but also how do we evolve the products to meet you where you are and then attempt to take you into the future. So I would say what we have to do is continue to listen, continue to collaborate, and then something that we personally have been going through in our organization is, again, just looking in the mirror to saying, are we best suited for the moment that is here in front of us? Are we best suited, operationally, commercially for the moment that's 5 years out, 10 years out, and then looking at the market to say, how is it evolving? What do we think the best case scenario is moving forward? What do we think is likely to change? And then how do we develop services, products, again, to meet our customers where they are?
Yeah.
That is the paramount focus as we go forward, because without our customers, we're not much of anything.
Good points. Let's pick up on some of the USMCA aspects that were raised. And again, we won't talk about it all. We could talk about it for days, but just to highlight something that actually was noted already by two of our speakers up to now, Monica Garcia from General Motors and Evelyn earlier today from Stellantis. They have taken a new approach for some suppliers where they realize they can help them to comply with USMCA where they're not currently complying, because obviously the stakes are higher now with the tariff exemptions, for example. So. Is that true for both of you as well, for Toyota and Nissan? Are you working with suppliers in new ways to help them to qualify where they're not, or identify things that they can do to perhaps to comply if it's not so easy? Yeah. Maybe I'll start with you, Lazetta, and then come to Gerardo.
Of course. Yeah, we have been working diligently with each one of our suppliers since the agreement entered into force back in 2020. And of course, it's not an easy task because it's time-consuming and it's administrative burdens. But we understand that it's fundamental to accompany and to guide our suppliers first on have a full understanding on the new requirements.
Yeah.
Secondly, to implement the correct or the appropriate processes to ensure compliance, and help them in case that we notice something that is not going good, because their compliance traduces or translates in our compliance. Yeah. So at this point in time, I'm very proud to say that Toyota is complying with every single requirement of the USMCA, and that our suppliers have been doing a great work to do so. Of course, again, a lot of time and information refining, but yes, we are on track, and we are very happy with this collaboration. For us, our suppliers are part of the family, are our arm, and we need to keep working closely with them.
Well, definitively, and fully understand that we are trying to do our best. Our situation is quite similar. After USMCA was enacted, this last version and all the requirements of RVC and LVC were clear on the table, how the evolution of the thresholds were to be increased, etc. There has been a lot of cross-functional activities since 2 years ago to understand all the enablers. Yeah? What are all the enablers that can help us to make sure that we 100% qualify? So within the idea of thinking outside of the box, there has been a lot of actions already implemented. I'm proud to share with the forum that just last fiscal year, one of our teams were the winners of the America's Chairman Award. because we were able to make sure that we qualify all our vehicles, Nissan vehicles that we produce in Mexico, and we export to USA, thanks to multiple actions that were done with functions as design, purchasing, supply chain, manufacturing, our logistics, our brokers, in a way that operation that we created in the Texas state to enable qualification for most of our key models that at the end help us to qualify all our portfolio. This was granted as the winner of the chairman because it has some of our more important values in the company. Working as a one team always trying to be proactive and resilient, respecting the rules. And of course, within this, going back to your question about how to help suppliers, there is another layer of very important part of activities. Digital tools were developed to provide suppliers with an efficient way for them to give us their certificates of compliance. These digital tools were expanded from not only compliance on RVC or LVC, but compliance with the TRN data. It was a very important point for us to offer efficient solutions for suppliers, for them to demonstrate that they can comply. And I'm not talking not only about the USMCA, that we can comply with the human rights and TRNs. And with this type of collaboration with suppliers, we have seen a tremendous and positive response. Again, thank you. There are other initiatives that are coming to enable suppliers. As example, now we are exploring together with the purchasing teams how localization efforts, as someone spoke, can be done not only for our tier 1s, but for tier 2s or tier 3s, or for specific raw materials or a specific content that is really the commodity that can move the needle, right? To help them and to help us qualify. And definitively, there is a lot of collaboration. I strongly believe there is more than we can do together. But again, big appreciation to all the team that have been working to enable where we are now.
Yeah. I can see again where the sort of efforts to map the supply chain more deeply can help perhaps in identifying some of these opportunities as well for compliance.
Yes. Mapping suppliers, just if I may.
Yes,
After all of these USMCA requirements, human rights requirements, yes, we have an important level of data already available from TRN compliance point of view. But then we are realizing and already using in a significant, much better way to react when we have incidents or external threats. There is an explosion of a factory in somewhere, and we immediately can know how many suppliers, how many tier 2s or tier 3s are within 200 or 300 kilometers in a very aware that we can react faster, going back to the resilience concept. So definitively a lot to do, but I think we are in the right track.
Absolutely. Ian, I wouldn't necessarily imagine that the freight forwarder's role is to help a company comply with USMCA, but nonetheless, do you see opportunities where you can help companies better connect or better comply with some of these regulations as they come through? Has that become a bigger focus for Kuehne+Nagel? I mean, clearly you mentioned Kataporte as one example.
So yes, it's something that we're interested in at Kuehne+Nagel, something that we're doing today, something that we've made significant investment in over the last, at this point, I would say 4 years. So I try not to treat these opportunities as a platform for advertisement for Kuehne+Nagel, for me to tell you everything there is to know. But we've leaned in heavier into customs and trade consultancy, customs brokerage on all borders. We've always done it, but we've leaned heavier into it over the last 4 years. We've made some serious acquisitions in the space that have allowed us to accelerate our product offering and deepen it to our clients. And so we kind of treat it as bookends as it relates to all policies, not just MCA. But when I say bookends, we're doing the consultancy on the front end to understand what technology are you guys using today, what problems have you had historically, what kind of audits have you run, doing secondary audits, doing postmortems, looking at the variety of the HTS codes, value timing, so forth. And then we also, where we handle the customs brokerage, the other bookend and the other end of the spectrum is, again, combing through the data and looking at where have we seen fractures in the process or inefficiency relative to the amount of time that it's taken to achieve the desired outcome. and then analyzing down further, why did this happen? What are we able to tweak and or pivot so that we can have a better outcome, and then advising, offering, greater technology than what's used today in order to achieve those outcomes, and then reinvesting for the future so that we bring products that are better than what we have today into the market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can imagine that with the complexities in trade compliance and customs, there's a lot of areas to offer value and identify. Lisetta, coming back onto the renegotiation, and we've talked about this, we should definitely call it a renegotiation and not a review. That's pretty clear at this point for USMCA.
Yeah.
One of the things we've spoken about earlier, but I'd like you to we talk about more with the audience. So one of the things is the US may likely demand Mexico to remove certain non-tariff barriers in trade. What do you think will be most important to keep in mind in terms of the automotive industry?
So the USTR published this document with a dozen of non-trade barriers, which go from agricultural matters to energy issues. However, the thing is not only those non-trade barriers. We all know that the US has concerns over other topics that are not in that document, which are, for instance, the reform to the judiciary or the organized crime matters, border security, immigration, a large list of issues. So there is no one specific issue that would impact auto industry, but the whole thing. Yeah. Because, and I am sure that you have heard the declarations of Ambassador Greer, the USTR, saying that if Mexico does not address all of these, including the ones that I mentioned that are not in the document, the US is not going to start a review with Mexico. Right. It's not, the USMCA revision is not going to move forward. So in that sense, in our view, what Mexico needs to do is to strategically address such issues. And when I say strategically, it means that potentially Mexico would need to implement counter reforms to move what is currently in place so that we can comply with or address such concerns, and also maintain an ongoing dialogue, which Mexico has been doing good in that sense, so that we can achieve a seat at the table, at the negotiation table, with certain extent of level conditions. I'll say that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I trying to take it positively, I suppose some of the issues are things, I mean, even Gerardo mentioned, rule of law and security, wanting to improve it. These are certainly not things that we don't want addressed. So collectively together, it's maybe challenging because we need to respond to all of that, but hopefully it's pushing on some sides that can work to the benefit. If we were to drill down a little bit more, though, into maybe one of the more, I don't know if it's contentious or tricky parts in terms of rules of origin. Because rules of origin content levels are already pretty high for the USMCA if you look at compared to other free trade agreements, both the local value and the labor value input. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in the renegotiation and demands, but there's definitely speculation that this will want to be pushed up further from the US side. What's your position, or what is Toyota's position, or what do you observe as an industry position on that from the, looking at potentially that requirement increasing?
So nobody knows.
No, nobody knows, but...
So as you mentioned, the automotive rule of origin under the USMCA is not strict. It's the most stringent rule in any trade agreement. Yeah. And why? Because, I'll explain, because maybe not everyone understands this, but there is the regional value content element that is naturally included in any trade agreement. But with the renegotiation of NAFTA in 2018, the agreement now considers elements such as Gerardo mentioned, the labor provisions, specific percentages of regional value content for key components, or percentages of steel and aluminum purchases in North America. So that makes very complicated to comply with these requirements. So the industry understands that there would be modifications and there would be demands from the US to increase these labor provisions, increase regional value content, include new components within these key parts section, of course eliminating components from China within the supply chain. And of course, for the companies that are complying like Toyota, that we have been doing a tremendous effort to comply with each one of these requirements, because this is not only about refining information or working with suppliers, it also requires investments, huge investments in North America. So in our view, these new elements that are on the air and that may be put at the table should be strategically analyzed. And why? Because if you increase the rule of origin, of the whole rule of origin of the auto industry, it may impact or it may have a non-reversible impact to the auto industry. And it will hurt the competitiveness, not only of the companies, but for the whole auto industry in the region. Yeah. So we need to be very careful, because if North America loses competitiveness vis-a-vis other countries or vis-a-vis other regions, it is going to be a very, very hard situation.
Absolutely. And Gerardo, you already mentioned that you all use Mexico increasingly as an export center for Latin America and other regions as well. So it is, by its nature, integrated regionally, but we're globally competitive. Yeah. It needs to compete globally and can't knock itself back from both perspectives. Maybe, again, because I won't ask speculation on further speculation, but I want to just understand the position of where we sit. But in terms of working with your suppliers, Gerardo, to increase localization, reduce supply chain complexity, is this kind of part of this focus as well, as you mentioned, right?
Yes,
in terms of centralizing on Aguascalientes and moving suppliers with you.
Before I respond to that question, let me go.
Yeah, please. If you want to comment, I will.
Very important comments from this, but I just would like to share this with the forum. Yes, the renegotiations of the USMCA are ongoing, and there are very strong pressures from both sides. I think, going back to your initial question on policies or what is the role of government in this moment, I think it's absolutely necessary that, same as Toyota, same as Nissan or GM or Stellantis, we all clearly understand where we are. What is our situation? What are our difficulties? Where we have advantages? Where we have disadvantages? And we all are trying to do our best to go and succeed, right? I think whomever is sit on the table for going to this negotiation needs to correctly understand what is the status of the industry. There were some assumptions and sort of statements that were expressed during the tariffs discussions at the very beginning. Oh, the automotive industry is going to be okay. It's going, what? Really? Whomever is making those statements on behalf of the responsibility that the federal government people that is on the table negotiating has no clue on what is really the reality. So I think it's mandatory that from all the industry, that persons have the full understanding on where exactly we are. Where can we become more competitive to be able to offer something more competitive? But of course, defend as necessary those premises that if are accepted without understanding our current situation, we will be knocked down. And this is the moment. It's not tomorrow.
But let me tell you something. Two things. The first one is that the industry has been very clear on what are the issues and the status and what would be the risk and how competitiveness would be impacted if this does not, if it's not seen strategically. The thing here, or what we are saying, is that there is a local narrative for the national audience. That is different, but they understand. That's the number one. And number two is that in our review, the negotiations have not started in terms of trade.
Right.
So far, the thing is political at this point in time.
Yeah.
Thanks God.
Yeah.
But, and hopefully, our governments can achieve an agreement.
Really negotiate,
yeah.
But it's not yet a trade issue.
But the politicalization of it is dangerous.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, it is. Yeah.
Because if it gets out into the public audience and there's a perception of certain things, right, it reverberates back into the political base and to the leaders that are then potentially negotiating. And to your point, Gerardo, I think really quickly when we saw some of the tariffs roll out, there were tier ones and OEMs sending lobbyists immediately to Washington.
Yes,
there were
yes.
trade groups that were
Yes,
deployed to
yes.
Washington to say, listen, I don't know who hatched this plan, but you don't understand the full life cycle of,
Yeah.
The
of
full
the
scope.
automotive components
That was
and
my
how
Yeah.
some of these
Yeah.
components travel across borders multiple times and what it is that you're going to do. And there were a few senior leaders in the auto industry that were extremely vocal that this is not going to be a good thing and here's the impact that you're going to see. And then this is what happens to the competitiveness of the US, the region, Mexico. And we have to all understand that, you know, while we are separate countries, we're one region, we're three neighbors together.
Correct.
And if you want a solid community that will withstand the test of time, you have to look inward with each other and understand how do we, again, I hate to be a broken record, but how do we move, you know, together faster and further?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And going back to the
No,
question.
no, please. I mean, I love
Yes.
I love the discussion. That's just,
Yes, how to help the suppliers
yes,
collaborate. Well, here we are, we have some of our logistics experts. There is already like a collaboration with our suppliers to be more efficient in our logistics for whatever, local or import parts.
yeah.
As I said in other forums, there is another type of discussion with our suppliers about can we help together to localize raw materials? Example, can we add the scope of our programs for raw material localization as of Nissan with our suppliers, but to help the suppliers of our suppliers. In other words, trying to extend the negotiations with all the makers for raw materials in such a way that we incorporate not only tier ones, but tier twos or tier threes. Still a long way to go, but definitively the collaboration with our suppliers is I think it's tough because suppliers are not only our suppliers, they need to also keep supplying Toyota, GM, and everyone. And that's what I think that we as an industry can work somehow more efficient if we focus together to recover the competitiveness of Mexico.
Absolutely. Ian, I was interested in what the role that logistics providers and freight forwarders might play with OEMs and suppliers making some of these decisions, right? Because localization, it comes with different kinds of logistics as well. I mean, you need to understand the changing requirements, perhaps, of sourcing regionally, locally, globally. So do you see a greater role for Kuehne+Nagel or for freight forwarders to add value in this process as well?
Yes, I don't know that it's changed any with the advent of, well, I wouldn't say advent of localization, but I guess a propensity as of late to go towards localization. You know, freight forwarders or logistics service providers have always been treated and looked to in a lot of tier ones or OEMs as, you know, the experts. Obviously, there's the in-house logistics team you mentioned earlier. Throughout my career, I've been a part of some of those teams at tier ones. And so you craft certain ideas based on ambitions or aspirations inside of the organization, right? Whether it be a tier one or an OEM, and then you go get validation and further information to you know, fully cook your decision, whether it be, again, whether it be, you know, footprint design, building a new facility, what the financial implications are relative to building that from a transportation perspective, what it does to inventory and carrying cost, what, you know, potential interruptions you may see based on, you know, how you've decided to place a facility, whether it be, again, a warehouse or a production facility, and how you look at total landed cost and vulnerability of that. So, you know, with a greater eye towards localization, those conversations have become more frequent, they become deeper, and I guess the bar that has been set has been raised in terms of what we have to bring to be a trusted partner, a partner that continuously brings value. So these things continue to be important, and we're asked to push back on our clients and really say, okay, well, that might work, but have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? What happens if this, and then present, not just poke holes in it, right? Because you can't come, just with well, that has a bunch of problems. You have to then come with a solution. So we've been asked to up our game, so to speak. As these manufacturers have to rise to meet the new market and the new obstacles that are associated with that market. So the answer is yes.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe one more point on the kind of regionalization aspect. I mean, Lisetta, you mentioned that one requirement. Well, increasingly, there's pressure to remove things from China from the supply chain, whether in the U.S. through forced labor aspects and other demands. But again, trying to look at this as some positive aspects. Do you see more scope in a region to source more of the critical minerals and materials, even semiconductors, things like that, which are continuing to disrupt the supply chain and put the supply chain at risk in North America? So again, trying to see it a little bit more positively, is this something for the industry to sort of look together at and say, okay, as a region, maybe we can be more resilient and reduce reliance on some other areas?
Yeah. So in terms of chips, yes, there is room to localize. And as a matter of fact, there are already projects in place, binational projects between Mexico and the US for developing this type of materials or components. But talking specifically about the critical minerals, and this is my personal opinion, I think that if China is weaponizing these critical minerals, in the trade war with the US and with the West, as we have seen in the past weeks. Maybe what the West should do is to reconsider its technological strategy for the future. Otherwise, it will always depend and rely on such materials and be in the middle of these discussions. Because we know that in North America, there is very limited availability of these materials. So how are we going to get them? And also to develop and to process and to have the materials to process, to produce a battery, an EV battery, for instance, it would take 10 or 12 years.
To develop that,
So maybe thinking in a change, because here the point is that West had a confusion of technology when the discussion was emissions. The emissions were the issue. We need to decarbonize. It doesn't matter what type of technology you are going to use. So if these materials are creating such an issue, because you need to produce X technology, maybe we should start thinking on changing our minds on the course of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a challenge in a deglobalized or the kind of splintering, if you like, of trade that we're starting to see. So hopefully there can be some sense on that, because it's the only way to actually be more resilient in that sense.
Yeah. Because it is not the case of Toyota, because we have been investing for decades on electrification development and R&D. But many other companies have not, and they don't have the technologies. And catching up with Chinese industry is going to be impossible, almost impossible. So maybe thinking on betting in hydrogen or in other technologies so that you don't rely on such critical minerals. And of course, relocalize those materials or components that are critical that you can't produce in the region.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, you want to add something? Please.
So I liked what you said. And I understand that it's a personal opinion, and this is also a personal opinion. I want to make sure that I put that caveat out there. So as it relates to that topic specifically, I think that it's important that even if you diversify, the technology or the source, it's in terms of what sort of energy are you using, right, to propel the industry forward. I think we also have to be, again, more cognizant of this idea that there is global uncertainty and vulnerability, and we have to look at everything that's happening around us and really take it in and understand, ooh, this is happening to somebody. It might be not happening to me in the moment, but should I be cognizant of this and plan around it? And so what I'm speaking about specifically is you talked about the weaponization of the rare earth minerals. China did this to Japan in 2018. Nobody digested that. Or, my personal opinion, not in a real way, because we find ourselves caught in it again. And your point that I understood you to say, I don't think you said it explicitly, which is these things take time. But we're 6 years removed from 18, and we find ourselves in the pinch again. And so it's about, not only diversification of technology, but diversification of sourcing. And then it comes to policy and it comes to foreign direct investment. How do we help other areas of the world that may have some of what we need to, to be able to produce it into the market? And then that leads to power in a way, right? Soft and hard power together to then have different conversations with the parties that have more of the control to make the industry run, well, the existing industry run, if you can read between the lines, forward again. So I think we really have to pay attention to what's going on around us and not take any information for granted and try to process it. And then to go back to the conversation we had in Detroit, Chris, to scenario plan based on the information that you're taking in, because you have to understand what are the outcomes of these potential situations and what happens if I make this decision? What happens if I don't take a decision, because indecision is a decision? What then unfolds and how does it impact the industry, my company, so on and so forth?
It's a absolutely great point. There's a couple of topics I want to hit on, but I'm happy to open up as well. If there's questions or comments from the audience, we will have microphones going around, and we have one from the young lady right here in the front. Actually, from two, the young man and the young lady. We'll start with the young lady. It's not on just yet. I think you make sure it's on, Rich. It should be okay now.
First of all, thank you so much on the comments on the tariff situation. That was very insightful. But my question is more regarding of what expectations do you have for your suppliers, specifically in logistics, to be able to be as reactive and proactive as you guys that have that vision of how are we going to respond if another supplier disruption were to happen through foreign policy?
I think maybe
I can take that question.
Yeah.
Well, the expectation with suppliers have always been very clear. I mean, we all need to comply, and suppliers have, of course, the responsibility, the support, the collaboration to enable compliance with whatever type of requirements, the basics on quality, delivery time, etc., to the more complicated on tier-end content and, of course, regional value content. I think it's not about demanding the requirement to supply. It's about how can we become more collaborative and more efficient together. Because time matters, and matters a lot. And in many cases, I think one area of opportunity that I spend a lot of my time visiting suppliers and within the groups that we call the supply risk management teams. And in many of the times, by visiting the suppliers, you can immediately realize when a supplier has the correct level of administration structure, plan management, sourcing management, capability management, and of course, all of this compliance on tariffs, etc. It's very easy to understand to see when the supplier is not well organized. And then, of course, it's not that we expect them to go by themselves. Then we bring support because, again, I need them to comply for me to comply.
Yeah.
And when I say it is about time and time matters, it's because usually when you identify any problem related to tariffs or whatever, yes, the execution of the solutions takes months or more time. In findings with key global suppliers about, example, human rights potential violations, we must move as fast as possible. And when I say we, is together with the supplier of the supplier and all the entire tier chain. So again, a big appreciation to our suppliers that are always responding, and of course, we need to be agile in complying together.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to add?
No, good.
Or maybe as a logistics provider, have you felt a greater pressure to, be that much more reactive as well as proactive as these changes go back and forth?
We certainly have, because we feel the pain when the expectations aren't met,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We get looked at immediately to say,
Hey, urgent.
yeah, and so we have to do the same, right? It's one big chain or stream, and so we're doing the same thing that Gerardo had just mentioned, is how do we work with, because we are NVOCC, or
Yeah.
non-asset-based operating company. So we work with our supply base, and then we work with our customer to understand the complexity of the regulation, and then advise on what incremental behavioral changes or data changes are we able to put in place in order to speed things up, and then what are the longer-term initiatives that will allow us all to become better together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we had another question here in the second row.
Hello. For the audience, I promise you this is going to be my last question for the panel. Secondly, I would like to make a few comments. First of all, Lisette, thank you very much for your clear path moving forward. Gerardo, I know pretty well Nissan. In TMM, I forgot to introduce myself, Francisco Estrada, Managing Director with TMM. We are plenty aware about this extra plus load that we're going to be hitting our terminal in Aguascalientes.
Thank you.
And I know pretty well Kuehne+Nagel. Actually, I used to work with your former president in Mexico, Mauro Rodriguez. So I know pretty well. I have a very quick question for any of you that would like to answer. And the question is, from the automotive or forwarding perspective, what is the most limitations in terms of regulations that right now you are facing? And I'm asking you this because not necessarily the regulations are bad. Many regulations are contributing for a competitiveness. For instance, when you are moving cargo from the United States into Mexico, there is a regulations that allows to open up a T1 from a customer's perspective, so that the train doesn't stop at the border and we avoid bottlenecks. And we are talking about regulations. That is actually a Mexican regulation. So from your perspective right now, from a forwarding or automotive perspective, right now what is what most limit efficiency?
So thank you very much for your question. Very good question. Of course, regulations are needed and are part of public policy. And all of us, I assume, are aligned to have regulations and to comply with them. Having said that, the issue in Mexico, and this is something historic, is that we do not have regulatory predictability. And number one. And number two, there is also a trend to copy and paste regulations from the USA without taking into considerations country conditions. So, and insufficient also timelines to implement the regulations. I'd say that's the issue in a nutshell. Now, what is right now impacting our efficiency? Of course, our tariffs, as we mentioned, but also, these are not tariffs implemented by the Mexican government. This is the effect of the US decisions. But internally, what is impacting our business at this point in time is these sudden changes in regulations and in laws that are key for the auto industry. And I am going to give you an example. The customs law, it was reformed a few months ago, and it is an absolute regression of what we have and what we have been building for 20 years, and all the flexibilities that the industry and the whole private sector get. And this is important because Mexico is an exporter. We are a manufacturing hub that exports, for instance, the auto industry, 85% of the local production is exported, mainly to the US. So if you change and if you over-regulate the importers and the exporter companies, it affects efficiency and competitiveness. Of course, that's something that is hurting us. So in our review, more than trying to change or to make little modifications to these reforms, what our countries, I mean the three countries in the region, should be thinking on evolving current trade framework so that we can transition to a different model. And with this, I'm saying, for instance, a customs union in which you have three countries aligned in terms of rules, in which sudden changes cannot that cannot pass, and that you need this alignment. And also, it would be very effective in terms of corruption, because we will have these three parties on the same page. So, and this also could lead us as a region to a deeper integration as a bloc. I think that kind of decisions and logics should be analyzed instead of thinking on these little patches that can be rolled over again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean,
Sure.
and customs, it has come up a lot over the last 2 days, as you might imagine, as a challenge and barrier. And we talked a little bit, we mentioned Carta-Porta earlier, and I think, you know, Ian, again, you mentioned this is something Kuehne+Nagel's leaning into, right? How to help efficiency. So what are some ways in the current context that we can work through some of these burdens? Or is it actually that much more challenged considering the new law that's coming in for customs as well? I mean, I guess as alluded to, we have some uncertainty there too. But what are some approaches that we've taken to streamline?
So digging into the policy deeply, understanding what the changes are, and so I'm going to come back to that one. So I'll put a pin in it to understand what the changes are, to be able to advise the customer on how to accelerate the speed in which they comply with the new tariffs and/or customs regulations. But it's also then to look at the product catalog, again, look at the commodities to understand how you differentiate, because not all of them are treated the same, right? As we've had, you know, to Lizette's point, the constant change. Some of them, depending on the day, have a larger implication than others. So it's up to us as, you know, in addition to you guys are certainly experts, right? You run your business, you run them very well, but we're looked at as a supplemental service to dig even deeper and then advise and then create the technology to streamline. And sometimes working in a manufacturing organization, it's full of responsibility, it's full of tasks, it can sometimes be full of challenges and obstacles, and so the time that you guys have every day is finite, and sometimes you need to outsource some of the problems, some of the responsibilities, some of the complexities to a service provider, and so it's up to us to dig in a bit further and advise on how to best go forward with whether it be 232 or whatever regulations have just been passed down to say, this is how you keep as much of the money in your pockets, comply with the regulation, and get it over the borders as quickly as possible. But if I can answer the question that you asked from a freight forwarding perspective, so to touch a little bit on what Lizette said, regulations, you know, do achieve really positive outcomes, and they're necessary in, you know, in a lot of cases. I'm not using that as a blanket statement, but there are some regulations that in the country of Mexico that sometimes can be frustrating. They're set in place to achieve a positive outcome, but dealing with them immediate term, short term, can be, as I say, frustrating, complex, expensive, time-consuming, expensive for you guys. And so when we look at 2022 and the introduction of military presence into some of the customs activities in Mexico, that slowed things down. You can understand to some extent, and people may disagree, but why it was done. Does it help potentially with some of the objectives that the country of Mexico has going forward? I think certainly. but it has implications to manufacturers, it has implications to freight forwarders, and it's up to us collectively, I think, to express articulately and with data how some of these regulations have negative effects for the industry. Then if we take this full circle, and to go back to the theme of the conversation, if I understand it correctly, Chris, is how do we make the country of Mexico more competitive for the automotive sector? And how do we then make the region more competitive? And again, it's creating coalitions, trade groups to exercise the voice that we have as an industry to say, listen, we understand the impetus of this, but you also have to understand the some of the implications of it as it has to an industry. And those implications, again, reverberate back into the overall competitiveness of the country. And we're two interested parties, right? The auto industry and the Mexican government, we go hand in glove. And guys, we have to work through some of these problems that we have. And how can the data that we have help you refine your process and make it better, whether it be Carta Porta or, again, some of the institutions that we've seen inserted into the process? It's not that you just look at it and say automatically this is a bad thing. No, it's not always. But it's how do we do it better, and how do we create a constant flow of communication with level sensible heads that don't get hurt feelings about constructive criticism to make a better environment for the industry going forward.
Thank you very much. I know we've kind of coming close pretty much to time here, but I'd like to, and there's plenty of other topics we didn't touch deep enough on, security, how we manage these sort of protest disruptions that we've seen, etc. Not to mention things like infrastructure investment, but maybe just as some parting thoughts, in terms of where we should start now to achieve some of the goals that we want, that we've been discussing over the last hour or so. Kind of the question, like, what do we do on Monday, as opposed to what do we do in 5 years thing. So maybe just some parting thoughts on that. What as an industry should we start with in the next phase, or continue with as a priority, to achieve some of these goals to keep Mexico so competitive? And I'll start with you, Gerardo.
Well, like a type of closing comments, I hope this moment that Mexico is facing is effectively identified as a moment that needs to be changed. The direction that is ongoing, I don't think is the right one. I think it needs to be corrected. I think we are in a very important opportunity, going back to the reviews on the USMCA, because USMCA, since the very beginning, when it was the NAFTA, was meant to bring more competitiveness as a region and then be able to compete as a region worldwide. What really happened is that the competitiveness of the region was somehow accepted, recognized, but the other guys were able to advance faster. And what is true and what is being revealed through all of this latest event is that we lost competitiveness as a region. I'm not talking now Mexico, yeah? And other countries are already executing a very important long-term competitiveness improvement strategic plans. We can talk about ports worldwide. Here are experts better than me that you guys know how much China is dominating ports. We can talk about type of materials, etc. So I think it's moment that through this correct alignment on the right direction, really not only Mexico, but Mexico plus the USA plus Canada, we all can take this unique opportunity to reinvent ourselves again. We can do in the region all these critical materials, all these critical technologies, all this critical chip supply. Evidently, if we don't do that, my fear is that we will, out of these reviews, more fragmented, and then the competition, and then the need of collaboration with you guys will be extremely more important, because we all want to survive, and I want to use that word survive, in the industry being profitable, being with the capabilities to deliver. So I really hope that authorities get the message. I really hope that we as an industry speak our mind. We as a companies deliver the right level of message through the right level of channels to really bring this moment to enable the North American region become, again, a more competitive region. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Lizette, closing comments. I mean, I love about the way the vision of the customs union. I think that is something we should take out of this, and I think as an industry that would be pretty transformative. But as you look ahead, what would you sort of like to leave as your closing comments here?
So, thank you. First one, I would say that the Mexican government should focus on three things. The first one is strengthen the rule of law, which I fully agree with Gerardo's comment.
Absolutely.
It has been deteriorating lately very, very dramatically. Number two, the development of infrastructure. That includes ports, roads, and clean energy that we have talked a lot, and that is a key part for all global and local companies to meet our decarbonization objectives. And third, to solve the non-trade issues with the US so that we can start a good renegotiation or review of the USMCA, since the agreement is a cornerstone of the Mexican economy. And my wish for next year would be certainty for the auto industry.
Yeah.
Good wish.
Good recipe for
that wish.
Ian, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you both said it really nicely of what's ahead of us, what we need to do. So, and I don't mean this to be dark, but I think that we need to understand that, without each other, nobody's coming to save us. This is up to us. Us as an industry, us as a region. Yes, you pointed out, Lizette, a couple of good things throughout the course of the conversation. The perception that the U.S. has of Mexico and some of the things that it doesn't like, but understand that somehow somehow we have a hand in some of these things. I even dare to say, in some regards, complicit in some certain items. So we have to understand that we too have to have an open mind when negotiating this agreement with you guys, and there's going to be some give and take, and we also have to understand that this is not a short road. This is a very long road that we have to walk together. And I think the role that we play in all of this, I said before, my critique of the industry is maybe the industry hasn't been as loud as you pointed out. We need to have a loud, strong, uniform voice together to say, listen, if we can't get this right, guys, the future that we want to have is in question. And Gerardo pointed that out very nicely. I won't go into the politics of why other regions are moving faster than we maybe are perceived to be, but we have to stand up together, raise our concerns, and say there are solutions that can be achieved here. We just, again, have to be open-minded enough to achieve them together, because what's good for the industry is good for all of us. And we have to find that path forward. Yeah. And I think we can.
I think those are really important messages as we kind of close, right? Like not being complacent on any of these things. And even though I sort of structured a little bit the conversation around policy and industry, actually, as you rightly point out, actually, we have a role in both and an obligation in both, and stronger as an industry than as an individual or an individual company, that's for sure. Thank you all for your vision, for your ideas and input here to help close the conference in such a great way. Thank you so much.
Excellent.